Hi guys, how you doing? So, I did my hair. Yay! It's purpley now. The ends is still kind of funky, but you know, what do you do? Let's see. You can still see a couple of light spots, but it looks pretty good nonetheless. It's a purple, burgundy color. It's called ash violet or something like that. Deepest ash violet. It's more of a what I would say is a wine or a burgundy color, but still it's not bad. Not too bad. Yay! So, let's see here. Let's see here. Get that kind of stuff all done, and because I'm going to actually be working on the actual site today and trying to figure out how to get that working. Save. Save. Do all that. And oh, I'm all kinds of snappily. I wonder if it's that far along. No, doesn't look like it. Okay. So how are you guys doing today? Compelled. Hi, Compelled. Are you in the chat? I don't see you. Oh, boys. Oh, you know what I should do? Oops. Well, I guess I can just do it this way too. Today's live. Ah, shoot. I just closed my dashboard. Botherhead. What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do with me? Live stream. I don't know if it probably doesn't do anything to the stream if you close your dashboard. I'm guessing not. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Pop out the chat again, because the first time was just not enough. Let's see here. Oops, and I gotta get the get the book back. Get the book back, because of course I had it open, and of course I closed it, because who would want to leave the book open? And we're going down to last week was Mr. Tilly's Seance and Beyond the Wall of Sleep. This week is the Toll House, or today's the Toll House, Ex Oblivion, and Life of a Murder. So,
The Toll House by W. Jake.
There. Now I'm ready. Now I'm ready. Remember, folks, this is a professional setup, you know. Hi, Brian. Yay. Thanks, Brian. Nice. I'll have to go look after. I'll have to go look after. Nice to see you. Thanks for stopping by. And enjoy the whole thingy. I'm not set up to do my hands today. I'm getting there. I'm getting things organized again, and I got some new lights and all that kind of fun stuff, so hopefully it'll be next week. But anyway, I'm gonna mute myself first, and then it'll be okay. Mute.
The Toll House by W. Jacobs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jesse P. Watson. The Toll House by W. Jacobs. "It's all nonsense," said Jack Barnes. "Of course people have died in the house. People die in every house. As for the noises, wind in the chimney and rats in the wainscot are very convincing to a nervous man. Give me another cup of tea, Meagle." "Lester and Whiter first," said Meagle, who was presiding at the tea-table of the Three Feathers Inn. "You've had two." Lester and White finished their cups with irritating slowness, pausing between sips to sniff the aroma and to discover the sex and dates of arrival of the strangers which floated in some numbers in the beverage. Mr. Meagle served them to the brim, and then, turning to the grimly expectant Mr. Barnes, blandly requested him to ring for hot water. "We'll try and keep your nerves in their present healthy condition," he remarked. "For my part, I have a sort of half-and-half belief in the supernatural." "All sensible people have," said Lester. "An aunt of mine saw a ghost once." White nodded. "I had an uncle that saw one," he said. "It always is somebody else that sees them," said Barnes. "Well, there is a house," said Meagle. "A large house, at an absurdly low rent, and nobody will take it. It has taken toll of at least one life of every family that has lived there, however short the time, and since it has stood empty, caretaker after caretaker has died there. The last caretaker died 15 years ago. "Exactly," said Barnes. "Long enough ago for legends to accumulate." "I'll bet you a sovereign you won't spend the night there alone, for all you talk," said White, suddenly. "And I," said Lester. "No," said Barnes, slowly. "I don't believe in ghosts, nor in any supernatural things whatever. All the same, I admit that I should not care to pass a night there alone." "But why not?" inquired White. "Wind's in the chimney," said Meagle, with a grin. "Rats in the wainscot," chimed in Lester. "As you like," said Barnes, colouring. "Suppose we all go," said Meagle. "Start after supper, and get there about 11. We have been walking for 10 days now without an adventure, except Barnes' discovery that ditch-water smells longest. It will be a novelty at any rate, and if we break the spell by all surviving, the grateful owner ought to come down handsome." "Let's see what the landlord has to say about it first," said Lester. "There is no fun in passing a night in an ordinary empty house. Let us make sure that it is haunted." He rang the bell, and, sending for the landlord, appealed to him in the name of our common humanity not to let them waste a night watching in a house in which spectres and hobgoblins had no part. The reply was more than reassuring, and the landlord, after describing with considerable art the exact appearance of a head which had been seen hanging out of a window in the moonlight, wound up with a polite but urgent request that they would settle his bill before they went. "It's all very well for you young gentlemen to have your fun," he said indulgently, "but supposing as how you are all found dead in the morning, what about me? It ain't called the Toll House for nothing, you know." "Who died there last?" inquired Barnes, with an air of polite derision. "A tramp," was the reply. "He went there for the sake of 1/2 crown, and they found him next morning hanging from the balusters, dead." "Suicide," said Barnes. "Unsound mind." The landlord nodded. "That's what the jury brought in," he said slowly. "But his mind was sound enough when he went in there. I'd known him, off and on, for years. I'm a poor man, but I wouldn't spend the night in that house for £100. He repeated this remark as they started on their expedition a few hours later. They left as the inn was closing for the night. Bolts shot noisily behind them, and, as their regular customers trudged slowly homewards, they set off at a brisk pace in the direction of the house. Most of the cottages were already in darkness, and lights in others went out as they passed. "It seems rather hard that we have got to lose a night's rest in order to convince Barnes of the existence of ghosts," said White. "It's in a good cause," said Meagle. "A most worthy object, and something seems to tell me that we shall succeed. You didn't forget the candles, Lester?" "I have brought 2, was the reply. "All the old man could spare." There was but little moon, and the night was cloudy. The road between high hedges was dark, and, in one place, where it ran through a wood, so black that they twice stumbled in the uneven ground at the side of it. "Fancy leaving our comfortable beds for this," said White again. "Let me see. This desirable residential sepulchre lies to the right, doesn't it?" "Farther on," said Meagle. They walked on for some time in silence, broken only by White's tribute to the softness, the cleanliness, and the comfort of the bed which was receding farther and farther into the distance. Under Meagle's guidance they turned off at last to the right, and after a walk of 1/4 of a mile saw the gates of the house before them. The lodge was almost hidden by overgrowth shrubs, and the drive was choked with rank growths. Meagle leading, they pushed through it until the dark pile of the house loomed above them. "There is a window at the back where we can get in, so the landlord says," said Lester, as they stood before the hall door. "Window?" said Meagle. "Nonsense! Let's do the thing properly. Where's the knocker?" He felt for it in the darkness, and gave a thundering rat-tat-tat at the door. "Don't play the fool," said Barnes crossly. "Ghostly servants are all asleep," said Meagle gravely, "but I'll wake them up before I've done with them. It's scandalous keeping us out here in the dark." He plied the knocker again, and the noise volleyed in the emptiness beyond. Then, with a sudden exclamation, he put out his hands and stumbled forward. "Why, it was open all the time," he said, with an odd catch in his voice. "Come on." "I don't believe it was open," said Lester, hanging back. "Somebody is playing us a trick." "Nonsense," said Meagle sharply. "Give us a candle, thanks. Who's got a match?" Barnes produced a box and struck one, and Meagle, shielding the candle with his hand, led the way forward to the foot of the stairs. "Shut the door, somebody," he said. "There's too much draught." "It is shut," said White, glancing behind him. Meagle fingered his chin. "Who shut it?" he inquired, looking from one to the other. "Who came in last?" "I did," said Lester, "but I don't remember shutting it. Perhaps I did, though." Meagle, about to speak, thought better of it, and still carefully guarding the flame, began to explore the house with the others close behind. Shadows danced on the walls, and lurked in the corners as they proceeded. At the end of the passage they found a second staircase, and ascended it slowly, gaining the first floor. "Careful!" said Meagle, as they gained the landing. He held the candle forward, and showed where the balusters had broken away. Then he peered curiously into the void beneath. "This is where the tramp hanged himself, I suppose," he said thoughtfully. "You've got an unwholesome mind," said White, as they walked on. "This place is quite creepy enough without your remembering that. Now let's find a comfortable room and have a little nip of whisky apiece and a pipe. How will this do?" He opened a door at the end of the passage and revealed a small, square room. Meagle led the way with the candle, and, first melting a drop or two of tallow, stuck it on the mantelpiece. The others seated themselves on the floor and watched pleasantly as White drew from his pocket a small bottle of whisky and a tin cup. I've forgotten the water," he exclaimed. "I'll soon get some," said Meagle. He tugged violently at the bell handle, and the rusty jangling of a bell sounded from a distant kitchen. He rang again. "Don't play fool," said Barnes roughly. Meagle laughed. "I only wanted to convince you," he said kindly. "There ought to be, at any rate, one ghost in the servants' hall." Barnes held up his hand for silence. "Yes?" said Meagle, with a grin at the other two. "Is somebody coming?" "Suppose we drop this game and go back," said Barnes suddenly. "I don't believe in spirits, but nerves are outside anybody's command. You may laugh as you like, but it really seemed to me that I heard a door open below and steps on the stairs." His voice was drowned in a roar of laughter. "He is coming round," said Meagle with a smirk. "By the time I have done with him, he will be a confirmed believer. Well, who will go and get some water? Will you, Barnes?" "No," was the reply. "If there is any, it might not be safe to drink after all these years," said Lester. "We must do without it." Meagle nodded, and taking a seat on the floor, held out his hand for the cup. Pipes were lit, and the clean, wholesome smell of tobacco filled the room. White produced a pack of cards. Talk and laughter rang through the room, and died away reluctantly in distant corridors. "Empty rooms always delude me into the belief that I possess a deep voice," said Meagle. "Tomorrow—" He started up with a smothering exclamation as the light went out suddenly and something struck him on the head. The others sprang to their feet. Then Meagle laughed. "It's the candle," he explained. "I didn't stick it enough." Barnes struck a match, and relighting the candle, stuck it on the mantelpiece, and, sitting down, took up his cards again. "What was I going to say?" said Meagle. "Oh, I know. Tomorrow I—" "Listen," said White, laying his hand on the other's sleeve. "Upon my word, I really thought I heard a laugh." "Look here," said Barnes. "What do you say to going back? I've had enough of this. I keep fancying that I hear things too, sounds of something moving about in the passage outside. I know it's only fancy, but it's uncomfortable."
"You go if you want to," said Meagle, "and we will play dummy. Or you might ask the tramp to take your hand for you as you go downstairs." Barnes shivered and exclaimed angrily. He got up, and, walking to the half-closed door, listened. "Go outside," said Meagle, winking at the other two. "I'll dare you to go down to the hall door and back by yourself." Barnes came back, and, bending forward, lit his pipe at the candle.
"I am nervous, but rational," he said. blowing out a thin cloud of smoke. "My nerves tell me that there is something prowling up and down the long passage outside. My reason tells me that it is all nonsense. Where are my cards?" He sat down again, and, taking up his hand, looked through it carefully, and led. "Your play, White," he said, after a pause. White made no sign. "Why, he is asleep," said Meagle. "Wake up, old man. Wake up and play." Lester, who was sitting next to him, took the sleeping man by the arm and shook him, gently at first, and then with some roughness, but White, with his back against the wall and his head bowed, made no sign. Meagle bawled in his ear, and then turned a puzzled face to the other. "He sleeps like the dead," he said, grimacing. "Well, there are still 3 of us to keep each other company." "Yes," said Lester, nodding. "Unless... Good Lord! Suppose—" He broke off, and eyed them trembling. "Suppose what?" inquired Meagle. "Nothing," stammered Lester. "Let's wake him. Try him again. White! White!" "It's no good," said Meagle seriously. "There's something wrong about that sleep." "That's what I meant," said Lester. "And if he goes to sleep like that, why shouldn't—" Meagle sprang to his feet. "Nonsense!" he said roughly. "He's tired out, that's all. Still, let's take him up and clear out. You take his legs, and Barnes will lead the way with the candle. Yes? Who's that?" He looked up quickly towards the door. "Thought I heard somebody tap," he said, with a shamefaced laugh. "Now, Lester, up with him. 1, 2... Lester? Lester!" He sprang forward, too late. Lester, with his face buried in his arms, had rolled over on the floor fast asleep, and his utmost efforts failed to awaken him. "He is asleep," he stammered. "Asleep!" Barnes, who had taken the candle from the mantelpiece, stood peering at the sleepers in silence, and dropping tallow over the floor. "We must get out of this," said Meagle. "Quick!" Barnes hesitated. "We can't leave them here," he said. "We must," said Meagle, in strident tones. "If you go to sleep, I shall go. Quick, come!" He seized the other by the arm, and strove to drag him to the door. Barnes shook him off, and putting the candle back on the mantelpiece, tried again to arouse the sleepers. "It's no good," he said at last, and turning from them, watched Meagle. "Don't you go to sleep," he said anxiously. Meagle shook his head, and they stood for some time in uneasy silence. "May as well shut the door," said Barnes at last. He crossed over and closed it gently. Then, at a scuffling noise behind him, he turned and saw Meagle in a heap on the hearthstone. With a sharp catch in his breath, he stood motionless. Inside the room, the candle, fluttering in the draught, showed dimly the grotesque attitudes of the sleepers. Beyond the door, there seemed to his overwrought imagination a strange and stealthy unrest. He tried to whistle, but his lips were parched, and in a mechanical fashion he stooped and began to pick up the cards which littered the floor. He stopped once or twice and stood with bent head, listening. The unrest outside seemed to increase. A loud creaking sounded from the stairs. "Who is there?" he cried loudly. The creaking ceased. He crossed to the door and, flinging it open, strode out into the corridor. As he walked, his fears left him suddenly. "All of you! All of you! Show your faces, your infernal ugly faces! Don't skulk!" He laughed again and walked on, and the heap in the fireplace put out his head tortoise fashion and listened in horror to the retreating footsteps. Not until they had become inaudible in the distance did the listener's features relax. "Good Lord, Lester, "We've driven him mad," he said in a frightened whisper. "We must go after him." There was no reply. Meagle sprung to his feet. "Do you hear?" he cried. "Stop your fooling now! This is serious! What? Lester, do you hear?" He bent and surveyed them in angry bewilderment. "All right," he said in a trembling voice. "You won't frighten me, you know." He turned away and walked with exaggerated carelessness in the direction of the door. He even went outside and peeped through the crack, but the sleepers did not stir. He glanced into the blackness behind, and then came hastily into the room again. He stood for a few seconds regarding them. The stillness in the house was horrible. He could not even hear them breathe. With a sudden resolution, he snatched the candle from the mantelpiece and held the flame to White's finger. Then, as he reeled back, stupefied, the footsteps again became audible. He stood with the candle in his shaking hand, listening. He heard them ascending the further staircase, but they stopped suddenly as he went to the door. He walked a little way along the passage, and they went scurrying down the stairs, and then at a jog trot along the corridor below. He went back to the main staircase, and they ceased again. For a time he hung over the balusters, listening and trying to pierce the blackness below. Then, slowly, step by step, he made his way downstairs, and, holding the candle above his head, peered about him. "Barnes!" he called. "Where are you?" Shaking with fright, he made his way along the passage, and, summoning up all his courage, pushed open the doors and gazed fearfully into the empty rooms. Then, quite suddenly, he heard the footsteps in front of him. He followed slowly, for fear of extinguishing the candle, until they led him at last into a vast bare kitchen, with damp walls and a broken floor. In front of him a door leading into an inside room had just closed. He ran towards it and flung it open, and a cold air blew out the candle. He stood aghast. "Barnes!" he cried again. "Don't be afraid! It is I, Meagle!" There was no answer. He stood gazing into the darkness, and all the time the idea of something close at hand watching was upon him. Then, suddenly, the steps broke out overhead again. He drew back hastily, and passing through the kitchen, groped his way along the narrow passages. He could now see better in the darkness, and, finding himself at last at the foot of the staircase, began to ascend it noiselessly. He reached the landing just in time to see a figure disappear round the angle of a wall. Still careful to make no noise, he followed the sound of the steps until they led him to the top floor, and he cornered the chase at the end of a short passage. "Barnes?" he whispered. "Barnes!" Something stirred in the darkness. A small circular window at the end of the passage just softened the blackness and revealed the dim outlines of a motionless figure. Meagle, in place of advancing, stood almost as still as a sudden, horrible doubt took possession of him. With his eyes fixed on the shape in front, he fell back slowly, and, as it advanced upon him, burst into a terrible cry. "Barnes! For God's sake, is it you?" The echoes of his voice left the air quivering, but the figure before him paid no heed. For a moment he tried to brace his courage up to endure its approach. Then, with a smothered cry, he turned and fled. The passages wound like a maze, and he threaded them blindly in a vain search for the stairs. If he could get down and open the hall door— He caught his breath in a sob. The steps had begun again. At a lumbering trot they clattered up and down the bare passages, in and out up and down, as though in search of him. He stood appalled, and then, as they drew near, entered a small room, and stood behind the door as they rushed by. He came out and ran swiftly and noiselessly in the other direction, and in a moment the steps were after him. He found the long corridor and raced along it at top speed. The stairs, he knew, were at the end, and with the steps close behind, he descended them in blind haste. The steps gained on him, and he shrank to the side to let them pass, still continuing his headlong flight. Then suddenly he seemed to slip off the earth into space. Lester awoke in the morning to find the sunshine streaming into the room, and White sitting up and regarding with some perplexity a badly blistered finger. "Where are the others?" inquired Lester. "Gone, I suppose," said White. "We must have been asleep." Lester arose, and, stretching his stiffened limbs, dusted his clothes with his hands, and went out into the corridor. White followed. At the noise of their approach, a figure which had been lying asleep at the other end sat up and revealed the face of Barnes. "Why, I've been asleep," he said in surprise. "I don't remember coming here. How did I get here?" "Nice place to come for a nap," said Lester, severely, as he pointed to the gap in the balusters. "Look here, another yard, and where would you have been?" He walked carelessly to the edge and looked over. In response to his startled cry, the others drew near, and all three stood gazing at the dead man below. End of The Toll House. Recording by Jesse P. Watson. j.p.watson@hotmail.co.uk.
Oblivione. Oblivione by H.P. Lovecraft. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Oblivione by H.P. Lovecraft. When the last days were upon me, and the ugly trifles of existence began to drive me to madness, like the small drops of water that torturers let fall ceaselessly upon one spot of their victim's body, I loved the irradiate refuge of sleep. In my dreams I found a little of the beauty I had vainly sought in life, and wandered through old gardens and enchanted woods. Once, when the wind was soft and scented, I heard the south calling, and sailed endlessly and languorously under strange stars. Once, when the gentle rain fell, I glided in a barge down a sunless stream under the earth, till I reached another world of purple twilight, iridescent arbours, and undying roses. And once I walked through a golden valley that led to shadowy groves and ruins, and ended in a mighty wall, green with antique vines, and pierced by a little gate of bronze. Many times I walked through that valley, and longer would I pause in the spectral half-light, where the giant trees squirmed and twisted grotesquely, and the grey ground stretched damply from trunk to trunk, sometimes disclosing the mould-stained stones of buried temples. And always the goal of my fancies was the mighty vine-grown wall with the little gate of bronze therein. After a while, as the days of waking became less and less bearable from their greyness and sameness, I would often drift in opiate peace through the valley and the shadowy groves, and wonder how I might seize them for my eternal dwelling-place, so that I need no more crawl back to a dull world, stripped of interest and new colours. And as I looked upon the little gate in the mighty wall, I felt that beyond it lay a dream country, from which, once it was entered, there would be no return. So each night in sleep I strove to find the hidden latch of the gate in the ivied antique wall, though it was exceedingly well hidden, and I would tell myself that the realm beyond the wall was not more lasting merely, but more lovely and radiant as well. Then one night in the dream city of Zakarion I found a yellowed papyrus filled with the thoughts of dream sages who dwelt of old in that city, and who were too wise ever to be born in the waking world. Therein were written many things concerning the world of dream, and among them was lore of a golden valley and a sacred grove with temples and a high wall pierced by a little bronze gate. When I saw this lore, I knew that it touched on the scenes I had haunted, and I therefore read long in the yellowed papyrus. Some of the dream sages wrote gorgeously of the wonders beyond the irrepassable gate, and others told of horror and disappointment. I knew not which to believe, yet longed more and more to cross for ever into the unknown land, for doubt and secrecy are the lure of lures, and no new horror can be more terrible than the daily torture of the commonplace. So when I learned of the drug which would unlock the gate and drive me through, I resolved to take it when next I awaked. Last night I swallowed the drug, and floated dreamily into the golden valley and the shadowy groves, and when I came this time to the antique wall, I saw that the small gate of bronze was ajar. From beyond came a glow that weirdly lit the giant twisted trees and the tops of the buried temples, and I drifted on songfully, expectant of the glories of the land whence I should never return. But as the gate swung wider, and the sorcery of the drug and the dream pushed me through, I knew that all sights and glories were at an end. For in that new realm was neither land nor sea, but only the white void of unpeopled and illimitable space. So, happier than I had ever dared hope to be, I dissolved again into that native infinity of crystal oblivion, from which the demon life had called me for one brief and desolate hour. End of Ex Oblivione.
The Life of a Murderer, from The Shipwrecked Stranger, by Hannah Maria Jones. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jason Bennett. The Life of a Murderer, from The Shipwrecked Stranger, by Hannah Maria Jones. A murderer! God help me. Yes, time was when I shrunk affrighted from the very sound, when the name was spoken in whispers. Little thought I then I should ever bear the name, or die ignominiously upon the scaffold. I was doomed in early life to lose both my parents. I was reared with more kindness than philosophy by an aunt, for all said I was a spoiled child. I was an unruly boy, but never wanted affection. I was sent to a charity school, but mischief had more charms for me than learning, and the apple orchard in reality to that stamped in the reading lesson in my spelling book. Rebuke followed rebuke. Chastisements without number were lavished upon me. I was the dunce of the school. Inspired by a sudden whim, I determined one night as I lay in my little cot to be so no longer. I would learn. For 2 years did I carry out this resolution, with a heat and impetuosity that characterized all my little proceedings. At the expiration of this time I was acknowledged to be the first scholar in the school. My time was up, and the parish apprenticed me to a carpenter. My master was a stern, cruel man. I worked hard, lived hard, and was treated badly. For some error that I committed, I was brutally punished and confined in a cellar below ground. For 36 hours was I confined there, and not a particle of nourishment passed my lips. I was famishing, and thought he had shut me there to die. Through that long dismal night, oh, the agony and fright that I suffered! I have often wondered since it did not turn my brain. Hideous visions, which naught but a crazed imagination could depict, arose before me. I shrieked with agony, and the drops of perspiration stood upon my brow like beads. Young as I was, so bitter was that night, I dashed myself upon the ground and prayed for death. Morning came, and I was liberated. They said how pale and ill I looked. He cursed me for a sulky hound, and swore to kill me or my temper. I thought a few more nights in his dismal cellar would do both. That night I determined to run away. I had no money, and my aunt's house was a good 20 miles off. There was a small box in my room, in which my master kept his loose coin. At this time its contents were but a few shillings. The temptation was a strong one. I walked to and fro. God only knows the bitter struggle of good and bad within my breast. The latter triumphed. Alas, that it did, for to that hour all my subsequent crimes, degradation, and death can be traced. I took one shilling. I crept softly down the stairs, and even went back again to replace the stolen property, but the fear of want, for I had bitterly experienced the pangs of hunger, prevailed, and I became a thief. With hushed breath and noiseless step, I crept stealthily away. On I flew, but a thief. Had the coin been red hot, and scarred and burnt me as I went, I could have borne it better than that rankling thought. 15 miles had I walked. I feared to go near house or human being, though my hunger and thirst was excessive. I felt as if my brow, Cain-like, had the crime written upon it. At length, wearied and fatigued, footsore and sick at heart, I crept into the hedge, and I suppose fell into a doze, for when I awoke my cruel master and the parish constable stood over me. I was terrified beyond measure. I threw myself at my master's feet, confessed the whole, sobbed out my contrition, and implored him for mercy's sake to spare and forgive me. I have never forgotten his reply to this, or the laugh that accompanied it. It was spiteful, fiendish, beyond compare. Oh, you took to thieving then, did you, my runaway apprentice? Well done! Mercy! Oh, yes, after justice has been done, my lad, after justice. Constable, I charge this boy with robbery, and deliver him to your custody. I begged he would kill me, anything but send me to prison. The very officer joined his entreaties to mine. You cannot mean this, he said. Damn the boy, thrash him, punish him in any way you like, but don't ruin him for life. I give him into your custody. Refuse to take him at your peril. He's a damned young, whining, thievish hypocrite, and it's a mercy it's no hanging matter now, for by God if 'twas, not one word would I say to save him from swinging. I can't refuse to take him, said the constable, or I would, that's flat. I only say, and think it, and thanks be for it, that you may do as you like, but I would rather have my right hand chopped off than the consequences of this sin resting on my soul and troubling my conscience. Damn your conscience, said my master. With all my heart, said the constable. Some people seem to have no consciences to curse. Yours is a clear one, no doubt, he answered with a sneer. Come along, he said to me, and he dug his nails so deeply into my arm that my shirt was stained with blood, and I cried out, the pain it caused me was so great. Loose the lad, said the constable, sternly. He is my prisoner, and I'll charge you with an assault if you lay another finger upon him. Let him alone. He turned to me, and I thought I saw a tear trembling on his eyelid as he spoke, for he was the father of a family, and bore a good name in the place, and said, Come, my poor boy. He took me gently by the hand, and soothed me with kind words as he led me along, but when he left me it was within the dreary walls of the cage, or watch-house. I threw myself upon the heap of straw and slept. Sleep, with thoughts of death, and hideous forms and faces flitting to and fro. At morning dawn I was awakened. The jailer entered my cell. It was the constable who had taken me. He bid me silence, and, taking instruments fitting for the purpose, he sawed away, and 2 iron bars fell quickly to the ground. He stopped then and said these words: "If you was a boy of mine, and any ill came of this prosecution, I would have the villain's heart's blood. As 'tis, my poor lad, I pity you from my soul, and have risked my all to save you, for if they knew I aided in your escape I should lose my character, my place, and every means of livelihood. I have a young family dependent upon me, and cannot afford to do this, yet I will strain a nerve, and risk something to save you." He pointed to the windows. "This act will be imputed to you. It will be your own fault if they ever catch you again, and if they do not, there are plenty of names besides your own you can adopt." He opened the ponderous door. A horse and cart stood in waiting. He lifted me in, laid me at the bottom, covered me with a sack, and lashed the horse into a gallop. He checked it as we approached my native town, and jumping down, pulled me out, and, thrusting some money into my hand, bid me run then for dear life. Panting and breathless, I reached my old home, and throwing myself at my aunt's feet, revealed all. "God help us, child," she said. "They shall have both or none." For 3 days I lay there secure and undiscovered, but at last I was found out. I was dragged before a magistrate and searched. The money I had given me was found upon me. They questioned who gave me such a sum, and my master said he had missed the like amount. The liar! What could I say? I could not betray my friend, and my varying countenance, they all said, during the examination, betokened guilt. So thought the recorder, I presume, for from his merciless lips came the merciless words: "The sentence of the court is that you be confined in His Majesty's jail for 12 calendar months, and be twice privately whipped." Oh, that it had ended there! The wretch had my poor old aunt at the bar, and preferred a charge against her for aiding and abetting in the escape of a felon. Charged her with a crime, whose kind, gentle heart never harbored wicked thought. She was too noble to ask pardon of such a wretch, and too much a Christian to tell a lie. They sentenced her to be imprisoned for 3 months. God forgive them. She never came out alive. So great was the trouble that it snapped the fragile cords of life, and she had passed from this world into eternity ere her sentence was half completed. My young heart harbored thoughts of revenge, for I thought her a murdered woman. I came out, sadly altered for the worse. The consciousness of sin was gone, and I fancied I had suffered a martyrdom, instead of paying a just penalty for a sin. My former friends shrunk from me, as though I had contracted a loathsome, infectious disease. Some few pitied the young villain, but more denounced. There was an old playmate of mine, who had been reared within a few doors from my aunt's cottage. She was a gentle, kind girl. One day I overtook her. I was, I well recollect, footsore and hungered. I laid my hand upon her arm. My tremulous voice, my tearful eyes betrayed how full my heart was as I said, "And will you not speak to me, Jane? Not one parting word for him you may never see again?" "They have threatened to beat me," she replied timidly, "if they ever knew I passed word with you again. But oh, Jim, I never went upon my knees night or morning but I prayed for you, prayed He would change your heart, and make you good and pure as I once knew you, and ever thought you even now, for you are not guilty. Jim, are you? You cannot be." I buried my face in my hands and wept bitterly. "Did you, dear Jim, break from the watch-house?" "No." "Have you been the naughty boy he said?" "No." "You did not break your poor aunt's heart?" I was choking and could not answer. "You are no thief, Jim," she continued. "You did not rob your master?" I arose, and with uplifted hand said, "As I am a living sinner, never but of 1 shilling, so help me heaven." She dropped her hand, seemingly in despair, and moved away. "Be not merciless," I implored. "Have you no pity for a misguided boy?" "Oh, yes," she answered. "My heart is full of pity for my dear unfortunate friend, but friendship for a thief I have none." My last friend had left me. Years flew by. I married, and had 1 child. I struggled with her to live honestly, but struggled to live in vain. We had walked many miles that day, with little or no refreshment, for the want of which my wife's milk had dried, and the child was foodless. He sucked her dry breast, and then, apparently in utter helplessness, looked into our faces and uttered the moaning cry of starvation. My God, my sufferings were not compared to what I felt for my dear, patient, suffering wife and my innocent, unhappy child. It almost drove me mad. I went to the overseer of the parish. I told him we were in the last stage of starvation, that my wife and child were dying by inches. He made me out an order for flour and potatoes. I asked him what I were to do with them, having no place to cook or prepare them. I wanted money to purchase medicine. Potatoes were no food for a dying woman. He told me to leave his house, called me insolent, and threatened to commit me to prison. At that moment all the bad passions that ever raged in human breast were struggling for the mastery in mine. I shook my clenched fist in the air, and my teeth gnashed together with rage. He drew back affrighted, and well he might, for had he known how near a dreadful death he stood, that haughty tone of his would have been humbled. I went back to my poor wife. She looked into my face. Great God, what a long tale of sorrow, suffering, and privation was exhibited in that one gaze, and all borne without a murmur. Oh, I read in her pale face and sunken eye the fatal inroads want had made upon her otherwise strong constitution, and cursed myself, in the bitterness of my agony, as the author of it all. I knew she was ill, but she was so patient, so resigned, I never had idea how much so. She never saw day again. When morning broke, oh, misery dire and dread! The partner of my bosom was cold and lifeless as the ground on which she lay. The only one in this dark world that ever had kind wish or thought for me was dead. I had not tears. I rather thanked God he had removed my loved one from this place of torment to a brighter sphere. The last link that bound me to nature, and kept the man from springing from his nature into a devil, was broken and dead. My orphan child yet lived, but I, its father, had become an inveterate drinker, the vilest of drunkards. I leagued myself with bad men, and became famous for villainy. To drown thought, to stifle all reproaches of conscience, all memory of the past, all dread of the future, I had recourse to drink. 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 Some friend placed my poor child in the workhouse, and I was left to my fate. I had become, in reality now, a thief and robber. So notorious did I become that a reward was offered for my apprehension, and I was eventually taken, and though convicted only of a trivial crime, the greater ones could not be proved against me, I was sentenced to 14 years' transportation. I was sent to Van Diemen's Land. Now that I was debarred from the use of those cursed intoxicating drinks, I could think, and bitter agonizing thoughts perplexed me. My poor son was present to my imagination night and day, as though I had murdered him, was he before me. My time was almost up, and I determined for his sake, if possible, to reach England again. We were working in gangs, and in one of our expeditions to band a raft of logs floating on the water, I, struggling with the load, more than my most strenuous exertions could support, stumbled and fell. Someone kindly assisted me to my feet again. I gazed in his face. Heavens above, it was my son. He that I had left a mere child in England 14 years ago. So much agony and so much joy was in the meeting that I reeled and staggered like a drunken man. Happiness at meeting my son again, but bitter sorrow at meeting him there. He first found a tongue. "Father dear, listen," he said. "You think me guilty of sin, I read it in your face, but I swear," and he raised his hands toward heaven as he spoke, "I wear this degrading garb, but am as innocent of the crime imputed to me, and that doomed to this fate, as a child unborn. Father, I have been falsely accused, and most unjustly punished. They swore to lies, and by lies was I convicted. I was accused of highway robbery, when, at the time stated, I was miles away, and had witnesses to prove it. But yet they condemned me. Oh, had they eyes to read the human countenance, they would have seen innocence in mine, and guilt in his by whose evidence I was condemned. I asked his accuser's name. He said I could not know him. It was Baker. He lived at M. in Kent. It was the same man that ruined me when young, had made me what I was. At this moment our keeper noticed we were conversing. He approached and bid us with a curse, "Get to work." Night and day was his tale before me. Sleeping and waking it was ever present. I heard our keeper whispering to another one day. He pointed to my son. "The doctor says that boy's in a deep decline, and I think he bears every sign of it, for that flushed face, too bright for health, that harassing, distressing cough, that hard-drawn breath, as surely tells as the sundial reveals the hour." The man's words wrought such an effect upon me that I threw myself at his feet and begged of him, as though my boy's life lay in his hands, that he would recall those dreadful words. What more I said, or what he replied, I know not, for so overpowered with excessive agony, I fainted at his feet. The shock I had received threw me into a fever. I was delirious, frightfully so. My madness gave me strength, and in imagination I acted the bitter part in life I had fulfilled over and over again. I grew better, at length, daily. My son occasionally visited me, and then I watched the dreadful progress the blighting, incurable disease had made. At times when I noticed the bloom upon his cheeks, forgetting all, in a parent's deep love and pride, I would picture to myself and tell him what a fine, smart fellow he would be, and what happy days we would yet pass together in the old world. Or in a better, he would add solemnly, though I little thought to what his words had reference then. Day by day he grew weaker. One morning a keeper came, and, bidding me prepare for the worst, told me my boy was dead. Not a tear, sigh, or groan escaped me. I bent over his lifeless body, and swore to have vengeance, bitter, bloody, terrible vengeance on his murderer. I nursed this thought as though it was the climax of all earthly bliss. Ha! Kept it in my heart's core, to the exclusion of every other thought. A ship came into our port which had been dismasted in a storm, and many of its crew were drowned. My time was up. They gladly accepted my offer, and I worked my passage home to England. I set foot upon my native shore again with a heart full of dreadful thoughts. Actuated by these, I hastened with all speed towards the place where my old master, he who destroyed me and murdered my poor son, resided. I have heard of men being possessed of a devil. I felt as if there was one gnawing at my heart and urging me on to deeds of darkness and of blood. I went into a public house. There were plenty there now, for the village had grown into a town. A party of men, who by their dress were of the lower order, were speaking of my enemy. One with glaring eyes and fearful words was telling the others how the old villain had distrained upon a neighbor of his, who had been long suffering, and from the effects of want of employment and ill health had been unable to pay his demands, and through an old servant of his persecutor had been turned into the street to die like a dog. The man's furious pretensions found an echo in my troubled breast. Another, chiming in, said, "He's as hard-hearted an old scoundrel as ever cussed mankind with his infernal life. Don't you recollect, mates, how he served poor Jim? He called it justice, but in my opinion, if ever a man in the world committed murder, he swore away the life of that poor boy." He was referring to my son. Mastering the agitation which unnerved me, by a violent effort I turned to him and said calmly, "Were there any attempts made to prove his innocence?" "Oh, yes," answered the man. "A cove named Curtis, Bob Curtis, swore he slept at his house the night in question, which was a good 10 miles from the place where the old man said he was stopped and robbed. But Bob had been convicted once or twice of petty larcenies, so his oath wasn't taken. Moreover, the old man swore point blank he was the man that robbed him. People mustn't speak about such things, but more than one, to my certain knowledge, thought the prosecution a persecution. I know I did for one, though I ain't over anxious any of you should say I said so." I paid my reckoning and went out into the air. How opposite to the fierce passions that burnt and consumed me was the placid scene that met my eye. The moon was at the full, and the spire of the old church, as it glittered in the solemn lustrous light, looked in good truth like a cross of grace. The very tombs in the quiet yard, those living records of the dead and withered past, looked more than usually awful in the silvery light. How many a tale of misery and crime, of sin and pain, lay hushed and silent there. Withered age, long suffering, and children early nipped, ere yet they had hardly entered into life. Sin and virtue, age and youth, the good and bad, the rich and poor, the morose and mirthful, the saint and sinner, the oppressor and the oppressed, the miser and the spendthrift, with all the various shades and form which human life presents, lay huddled side by side, all enmity stilled, all heart-burning hushed, in that one quiet bed. See yon pompous stone, that receptacle holds the ashes of one who in life was a powerful man, the manhood and the power time's heavy hand had been at work upon, and all that remains is a heap of brown, unwholesome bones. Death, thou mystery of mysteries, which every one must learn, yet no man, with all his mighty reasoning in life, can imagine or fathom. One would have thought such a scene as this would have softened all the greater, and called forth all the finer feelings of my debased nature. But no, they only made the devil burn the more fierce. I went down to them, examined them minutely, traced letter after letter with my finger, in hope of discovering his name, the register of the death of a relative gone before him. I chuckled and rubbed my hands with demoniac joy at the thought of discovering a vacancy that I would soon fill up, of going there after he was dead, of treading down with my foot that mound under which his carcass lay rotting and festering. That is a fearful night for the memory to look back upon, a fearful one indeed. I thought of the difference in our situations. He had become a rich and powerful man, and look at me. I went to his house the next morning, under plea of requesting relief. I bound a handkerchief round my head to disguise myself. There was no need of that. Time and care had disguised me enough. He asked me what I wanted, in a stern and unfeeling tone. I answered in a tone as harsh and haughty as his own, "Bread." He told me, I must earn it. Such lazy villains as I was, if we had our deserts, would be in prison. I answered him, until in his rage he called me an insolent dog, and struck me. One spring like a tiger, thirsting for blood, upon his prey, my hand was upon his throat. All my bitter thoughts came into action now. I pressed. His face grew purple, his tongue hung from his mouth, and his eyes seemed staring from their sockets. The clammy sweat of death bedewed his forehead. 1 minute more, and he would have known the secret of death. But the door was burst open, and the domestics, alarmed by the uproar, entered the room. To release my victim, draw a large Spanish knife from my pocket, and to bare its fearful blade, was the work of a moment. Alarmed by my fierce glaring eyes, and the deadly weapon I carried, they drew back, and gave me free egress. Oh, how I laughed! He had suffered the pangs of death, but would suffer death itself the next time. I lingered about the neighborhood for many months, still firmly bent upon carrying my damnable plot into execution. One day I was in a large unfrequented wood. A narrow path ran at my feet, and, walking along with an enfeebled gait and tottering steps, came that devoted old man, alone. With a shout of delight I strode before him, seized him by the collar, and dragged him into the recesses of the wood. I then released him. "Listen," said I, and I detailed to him who I was, and that I had purposely traveled hundreds of miles to execute justice upon the murderer of my son. With a face blanched with fear, with lips quivering from excessive agony, and pale and bloodless, he fell upon his knees, and, in tones that would have moved an iron heart to pity, begged I would not hurl him to the grave unprepared, and his past sins unrepented of, but that I would have mercy, and not bathe my hands in the blood of an old man. Would to God I had listened to his prayer. I drew forth the fatal knife, bared its hideous blade, and brandished it in the air. The old man shrieked with agony. My God, I can dwell upon this scene no longer. One fierce curse, one deadly thrust, one loud cry of despair and agony, a gush of thick lifeblood. The deed was done. He lay at my feet, dead. Now the hideous fantasy had left me. I would have given the world, even my own life, to have healed that gaping wound, and to have put breath into those motionless nostrils. It was too late, alas. Cain's curse was upon me. I was a murderer. I was arrested, tried, condemned. In 2 days I shall suffer the dread death that is executed upon him who sheddeth the blood of a fellow man. God pardon me. My heart is full of grief, overflowing with repentance. Have mercy, heaven, upon him who was merciless. My kind friend, farewell. The blessing of a grateful heart and of a dying but repentant sinner attend you. Farewell until the verges into eternity. Then, I humbly hope, we shall meet in the promised land of bliss. Once again, farewell, and pray in your passage through life, tell the erring to take the path of rectitude, and forsake the path of death. And to the drunkard speak, thousands beside myself have been untimely hurried into eternity by its instrumentality. Tell them it is the high road to ruin, misery, crime, and death. Farewell. The life of a murderer is finished, and in a few brief hours will be closed in frightful reality. End of The Life of a Murderer, from The Shipwrecked Stranger, by Hannah Maria Jones.
Yay! So that was the last story for today. I'm just getting the stuff put into my site now, and yay! So excited. It's not like I'm counting or anything. You know, it's less than 3 days now. I'm so excited. Anyway, thanks for coming by, guys. I really appreciate it. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day, and see you next time. We got a few more books in this one if nobody requests anything in the meantime. Again, that is just a second here. I've got you like my hair, Rachel? Yeah. I got my new hair done. But yeah, if anybody has a request, you just send it to me in either here or you guys know how to get a hold of me, like really. LibriVox.org. There it is. I knew it was here somewhere. Yay! So excited. So anyway, thank you. It ended up getting a little, being a little not quite, but it kind of gives it a more of an ombre look. So I think I'm okay with it. It's not quite full coverage on the back, but it looks more ombre this way. But I figured I'd do my hair new for first Wednesday. So eek, so excited. Aww, yeah, it tends to do that, doesn't it? Oh well. I've got a black in my cupboard too, and blondes. I tend to buy a lot of hair color when it's on sale. Well, no, I've had the black for years, and I didn't end up doing it black yet. And then I had the blonde because I wanted to light my hair some so that the purple would show better. But it turned out more burgundy-ish, I guess. Either way, I've got a shirt that matches this color, so Canadide? Hands, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I'm sorry. What's okay, you know what Canadide is? I guess I'll have to go Google what Canadide is. No, no, if it's in LibriVox, we can go see. Um They're collaborative English. I think I like the collaboratives a bit better. Um, it's about 2 weeks. So yeah, we can definitely add that to. We'll add that one to the list. We will add that one to the list. Where's the thingy? Is that the one that I was looking at? Voltaire. Is this one good? Is the collaborative one good, or would you prefer the other one? French isn't gonna work for me. Francois Marie. Oh, why did that come up like that? Not. There. There. We'll do this one. We'll do that one next then. You like version 2 the best? Okay. Version 2 it is. Version 2. There. It is in the list for the next one up. Let me see here how much we have left for this one. We just finished this one, so we have about 2 hours left. So another week of this book, and then we'll be done. So not this week, but next week maybe. Not blah 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 blah. I'm not 100% sure exactly how I'll end up doing things while Josiah's here, so we'll have to kind of wing that week. I'm sure you guys will understand. So, but we will put it on the list. I'll put it on the list and we'll get to it in a week or two or so. And yeah. But like I said, I don't know what I'll do on the Tuesday and the Sunday stream next week. Maybe I'll pop on and do one of the short books, because there's the Gabriel Ernest, and that's only a short one, and the next one's only short, so might pop on and do a short one and then leave it at that, and just keep it up. But yeah, It's gonna be all exciting. Maybe Josiah will be here. Maybe we'll just do a full screen with him and I on here while the book's playing. Who knows? Who knows? Um, okay, I'll let you guys go. The Kennedy did the one that whatever however you pronounce the one that Hans requested we'll do next. Okay? Love you guys, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day. Bye.